Justice, Finance, and Property Committee to order. First item is Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Public comment. No one has approached the clerk or myself, but I would like to, in the public comment, just point out that we received communications from the clerk from the city of Colby relative to our processing of taxes and the timelines for entering items into the Ascent system. We will follow up with her and other clerks relative to the timing in the treasurer in an effort to try to resolve those issues. Any other public comments? If not, what are the wishes relative to the January 15th meeting? I would be looking for a motion.
I wasn't at the meeting, but I did watch, so, and I
counts.
read the meeting minutes, so I would move to approve if that's in order.
That certainly is. Thank you. I thought you were looking for the minutes. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor or Vice Chair Marshall. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of approval of minutes will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. All right, we will jump to item 6A1, request to utilize River Drive facility. Administrator Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief, but I wanted to advise the committee and seek some guidance on next steps. I was approached earlier this month after one of the homeless task force meetings, the joint meetings with the city and county, relative to one of our facilities, specifically 326 River Drive, and I was approached by the Marathon County Community Outreach Task Force Group, and if you're not familiar, that's the group that operates what has become known as the Marty Bus in the downtown area and provide some services to our unhoused individuals in the community, specifically serving meals and providing various items like clothing, hygiene items, shoes, and what have you. And I was provided with a letter, and I apologize, I didn't get it in the packet as I was gone last week, but essentially there was a request or an inquiry as to whether or not Marathon County would permit the rental of that 326 River Drive building, which is currently vacant. And as you all know, we're working to relocate departments from that River Drive campus to other locations with the idea to ultimately divest or otherwise redevelop that parcel. The request, again, is to ultimately utilize 326 River Drive between, this is according to the letter, between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. on Wednesdays and Fridays to operate for the provision of meals to the unhoused, as well as provision of some of that material, clothing, hygiene items, what have you, that I referenced before, as well as to have access to the bathrooms that do exist in that building. The letter that I received from Ms. Harness, who is kind of the director of that or leader of that group, is a request to rent that, referencing that they would pay $1 as well as any of the utility costs that would be associated with their utilization of that building. As you know, I don't make decisions about how we utilize buildings beyond what you've already provided direction on. So this would certainly be outside of our existing practice with those River Drive buildings, but nevertheless wanted to bring it to this committee to get some insight from you as to what, if any, action you want from me moving forward and speaking with that group.
So is there It is not one of the ones that's currently in use. Is that the old?
It's the old farm service building, and it is currently not in use.
Or are we heating it?
It is, Chris is here, he can provide more, but my understanding is it's, again, essentially vacant, it is vacant, but we are maintaining utility service to the building and maintaining it in a way that maintains the asset.
Mr. Chair, he summarized it very well. It's at minimum thresholds for utility use. There's nobody really using the water, but otherwise we're just maintaining the building as it's unoccupied and unused.
Supervisor Marshall.
I have a question, Administrator Leonard. Do we have anyone occupying the former Vanderwall Law Office?
No. And there are some facility issues with that, at least for the time being, without substantial investment, we wouldn't be in a position to kind of utilize that space. And I don't know, Chris, if you want to offer that.
To summarize, the water line between the city's line and the building broke and had been flooding the basement. So we resolved that and then had the water shut off until we can figure out what the ultimate use of that building will be, because you'll have to do a substantial amount of work to dig up the parking lot effectively, find the pipes leak to repair it if you did, and then make that repair and reconnect with the city water.
And follow up, we did pass a resolution on River Drive buildings back in the budget, and in that resolution was a divestiture of those properties. So I feel like this rental is not in line with what we had previously passed for resolution.
So is that, do we have, is it considered a formal request? Supervisor Hart.
Thank you. If I remember that resolution right, it was we would send out an RFP and then consider what we got back from it. So it wasn't necessarily divesting it. It was making that request for proposal and then seeing what comes back and then having the full board consider it afterwards, correct?
I don't have the language in front of me, but I think both of your statements are largely true. It was, my recollection is it called for an RFP process for divestment, and it also provided direction relative to any proceeds from divestment that they would go to both. Again, I'm going to be partially right probably and somewhat wrong, but my recollection is to go to a capital replacement and debt service were contemplated within that resolution for the funds, any proceeds from that divestment to go to those purposes. I can find that resolution, but to Supervisor or Vice Chair Marshall's point, that was the last guidance you had given is, hey, we have a plan for those buildings. I got a formal letter, so to your point, Mr. Chair, I took it as a formal request for utilization of those buildings, and I wasn't going to engage in negotiating that without clear direction from this committee to do that based on your the board's prior action.
From the chair's perspective, I'm concerned when we start encumbering buildings with leases relative to the flexibility that it gives us relative to our options going forward. And I think that there are other uses and potential uses of that facility and area that I think would be in the communities and counties' long-term better interest. And I'm reluctant to get into a lease agreement that would encumber or limit the discussions relative to the use of that campus or those three buildings. Supervisor Lemmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Forgive me, Administrator. I was trying to find it on a map what the property was, so I didn't necessarily pay attention to what you were saying. Did this go through the committee or the joint task force, or is this outside of? And if that's the case, I feel like it should be part of a comprehensive plan. And if the committee didn't, or the task force didn't hear it, is this part of a plan from some other group? The ones I'm involved with, it's not. So I'm just curious how this fits in the grand scheme of things.
Sure. I'll try to answer those in series. The short answer is first, no, it did not come through the joint task force. It was at the task force meeting where I was hand delivered a letter by Ms. Harness, who attends those meetings relatively frequently. So no, it has not been a formal request or recommendation through that task force. It's not come from any group, as I understand it, other than the Marathon County Outreach Task Force group, as opposed to the task force. I'm not sure that this specific proposal has been part of any comprehensive planning effort on any of the other groups that operate in the community. Not to rehash what has happened at the recent task force meetings, but earlier this month, I, along with city staff, were directed to do a couple of things. One, on a short-term project, was to identify some responses to our immediate short-term emergency shelter needs in the community, and then also a longer-term work with city staff to bring a proposal to both the city and the county elected bodies relative to that long-term strategy. But no, I have not received anything from any group that exists saying, hey, this is a formal request, other than the outreach task force itself.
Supervisor Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with Chair Robinson that this would limit our ability to entertain RFPs and would not be in our best interest. So I move to deny the request to utilize 326 River Drive.
Is there a second? Is there a second? Chair,
All right, let's do a letter school.
Chair can second, I think,
School party?
for discussion.
Party. Oh, that's not it. Okay, how did it go? Which one?
Take a letter under school, please.
Could, all right, any discussion on the motion? Yes.
Do we have any liability if they rent?
I'll let legal take that. They do, I would note in the letter, indicate that they would have liability insurance. But Mike, you want to talk through what our standard liability limits are that we require, generally speaking, in all of our contracts?
Sure. So generally what we look for anytime we're imposing liability limitations or insurance requirements in a contract is a $1 million per occurrence insurance limit, and generally a $5 million per in the aggregate limit. So I don't know what the particular insurance here is. I think the basic answer to your question is yes, the county could potentially have liability. Yes, we have insurance that would be interested to know about that lease, and we'd have to determine how to allocate that risk in the lease document if there was a lease developed. So that would be something to pay close attention to is if there was a lease agreement, we want to make sure that the county's as protected as possible.
Any other discussion? Supervisor Hurt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I wouldn't support not entertaining this, and not because I would like to look at this more, and I would like this group to maybe submit a formal request for proposal. I don't know if supporting this motion or not supporting this motion would prevent them from doing that in the future, because as of right now, I mean, a letter isn't, we need to know more about what that relationship would look like before we can make any agreement. So I just don't want to make a judgment without knowing what that would be yet. So I guess if you could answer that first part of my question.
I think one of the problems relative to the RFP is that we still are occupying part of that building with some of the county operations. And I think the intent was, once we've moved those and relocated those programs departments to the North Central Healthcare Campus or elsewhere, that we would begin that process. But that is 3 months, 4 months off?
If I can clarify, yeah, I think we're, excuse me, in terms of relocation, we're probably in that April, May timeline, but just to be very clear about what building we're talking about, 326 River Drive is entirely vacant, but it is on the campus. I mean, divesting just that building would, I think, be potentially problematic. In terms of an RFP, the county has not put out a formal RFP for the utilization of that parcel, whether 326, specifically, or the broader, what I'll call River Drive campus. We certainly, I think, envision doing that based on the direction that the board gave previously, as referenced by Vice Chair Marshall, with respect to divestment or redevelopment. But this, just like I said, I don't want to belabor the point. I just got a letter, and I am not in a position, absent guidance from this committee, to certainly enter into a lease. But also, I didn't think it was appropriate just for me to say, hey, no, I'm not going to do that.
And just to follow up on that, again, would this motion prevent them from submitting a formal request for proposal in the future?
If we put out a request for proposal, it certainly wouldn't preclude them from answering it.
This deals only with the issue at hand, which is the request to the administrator, not to future requests. We can't bind ourselves. So during that RFP process, if the community were to put that forward, we would be forced to consider it. Supervisor Lemmer.
Up to my plan.
I think I'm struggling because I feel like this could be a need that might turn the curve. I don't know what we need for emergency space, so I guess I'd like a weigh-in from the task force or a presentation formally from them to us. I hate to say no, but at this point, because I don't have enough information, I can't really say yes. So is there a possibility that we get more information either from the task force or from them?
Yes, it's possible, but then I would go back to is the intent to enter into a long-term relationship relative to the use of that property? And I think the thought has been relative to particularly that campus, those three buildings down there, that we would entertain proposals once the facility's available. And I think that's in the short term, in the next few months, that we would hopefully develop the RFP and be in a position to look at what those options are. Again, any other discussion? If not, all of those in favor.
Bacon cheeseburger plus endless fries. All for just $9.
All those in favor of adoption of the motion.
The Bridge, weeknights at 5:30. Only on Game Show Network. Welcome back to Second Chance.
All those in favor will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no.
Aye.
And all those opposed, no. That motion carries. Thank you. All right. The budget, 2026 budget process and timeline. I put this item on the agenda not because it's happening tomorrow, but because it is happening sometime this year. And we included in the packet the 2024 process for the 25 budget. And I also have it up here, the 24 budget, or the previous years. Last year, we had the informational meeting and presentation to the county board in June. And part of that was because we had a new county board, we had a new committee, and we wanted to get in place. The year before, we began the Budget 101 process in April. And we ran through a fairly detailed presentation that went over a couple of meetings with the administrator, board chair, finance director, and myself. And I wanted to get some sort of thought on your part of what some reasonable timelines would be, A, for doing the budget 101. When should we do that? How comprehensive should it be? When do you want the priorities set? When do you want the assumptions set? And when would we expect the administrator's budget? Last year, it was kicked back because we had a change in finance director, and we continue to struggle with Workday and the system. I think this year we can look at, I'd like to see it sometime in September personally, to give us and the committees more time to look at it. But I wanted to put the budget timeline and process out there for discussion now so that Samantha and the administrator and others can prepare for those timelines. So I welcome your thoughts. My thought would be that April, absolutely no later than May for the budget 101, and maybe earlier, better, just get people thinking. But I would really welcome your feedback. Supervisor, Vice Chair.
Thank you. I believe that a little bit of a shortened time frame, like May, is probably better because the length of time between April and when they actually talk about budget assumptions, things are forgotten. So May seems to be a good time frame, in my opinion.
So in 2 years ago, we had the budget priorities in May. And so we kind of moved everything up. So you set the priorities, we did the budget 101, and in May, we did the budget priorities, and then the assumptions in July, so we had a little bit more time. Last year, we did it in June, in July, or June for the budget 101, June for the priorities, and July for the assumptions. So I don't know, but it matters. We need to do it early because the administrator needs to get the priorities and the assumptions out to the department heads when they issue the instructions on preparing the budgets. So keep that in mind. Supervisor Lammer.
It would help me to get a reflection on the previous budget, so it would make more sense when we're putting these assumptions together. How did they work? Because sometimes I feel like when we put the energy in this year, it just felt like it was pulled out of nowhere. But then I'd like to see, did it matter? Did it do what we expected it to do? And maybe by May that's not possible, but it would be helpful to say, I look at your budget and page, I don't know, I think it's page 5 of your budget. You told us what you directed staff to do. And then later in the budget, page 11, maybe you had a whole section, the adjustments made to the balance sheet. Those I missed until I really went back and looked, and I think they're important. And I wonder if, because it takes so long to get through a budget, the rest of us forget that, and then we have a contentious meeting about all these amendments that we want to put in, because it seems like you did some things behind the scenes that we didn't pay attention to. So it would be helpful, at least before we did the June meeting, when we're trying to figure out some of those assumptions, that we get a reflection on, or a mid-year check on how our budget looks, and this is what we thoughtfully did, and this is how it's working out for us. I don't know, that would help me. And then another thing later, a 101 on how to write an amendment, because when it's just got a account number in, that's way over my head. I have no idea how to figure out what account number that is, but it's helpful to say it's transferring from this to this in plain language. That would be another thing that I would like to see either in the budget 101 or somewhere. I don't know if that makes sense.
That's why we have the high-priced attorneys and finance directors.
Can I make a suggestion? And this is just off the top of my head based on what you just said. I know we've moved away from, excuse me, with the budget amendment process. We do try to streamline it, and to the chair's point, we have all budget amendments. We ask supervisors, hey, sit down with either Sam or Mike, to use the same form, but I get the sense from your comment, and please, if I'm misinterpreting this, let me know. But there might be value in having, because we strip out a lot of the, like, hey, why am I making this amendment out of the amendment itself, to have a process whereby we give a form to supervisors to kind of provide the narrative explanation for what they're trying to do in a separate document. Would that also be helpful? Is that, I mean, maybe I'm misinterpreting what you're saying, but we certainly can include the, hey, this is how you make an amendment, and talk about how you work through Mike and Sam to, or myself to do that. But what has kind of not what isn't present in that, or that amendment, excuse me, is the, like, hey, why am I trying to do this?
Yeah, there were a couple of amendments that just had account numbers. It didn't really explain what they were for or where they were going to, and it was, I had no idea what to do with that. And we didn't get those amendments until maybe a Friday, or I don't remember, but there just wasn't a lot of time to even double check and ask, what does this mean? So it would be helpful to say it's going from, if you want to cut from, I don't know, Ann Lemmer's personal account, great, put Ann Lemmer's personal account is being cut, and that savings is going to, Lance Leonard's personal account, whatever, I don't know, but do you know what I'm saying? To really specify in plain language, not a number, but the actual spending mechanisms.
Sure. No, I think that makes sense. We've, from the staff side, excuse me, we do want to make sure we get the account numbers right. And I think in service of being very, very specific on account numbers and taking out kind of the whereas language that might otherwise provide some more narrative explanation for why, I think perhaps there's a way for us to do that differently. So I certainly will make a note, and we can easily put together a process and incorporate that into the Budget 101, whereby we kind of bring that back in a different way. Selfishly, I like this very simple, straightforward resolution that just says we're moving money from here to here, because it keeps it very clean. But also, to your point, hey, help me understand, if I try to put myself in the shoes of a supervisor, why is a supervisor trying to advocate for a particular amendment? They want the opportunity to draft what that is. What I don't want to have happen is staff to be the ones that could perhaps be perceived as the offers of amendments for that have a specific policy aim that, again, I try to keep staff out of the policy. Like, hey, what you choose in terms of what programs and services we deliver at what level and at what cost, that's a you board decision, not a staff decision. That said, we can find a way to do that.
Let me just throw this out for discussion. It's a state budget year, so that complicates some of our assumptions, because we can't always make some of those assumptions until after that budget is finalized. So if we were to go with a May Budget 101 at the May educational meeting or other meeting, June go with the priorities, July go with the assumptions, and then September for deliverable to the board and this committee of the budget. Does that make sense? I'm looking. I think what we're trying to do is just get on top of it early, and then we can go, set the year in motion. We can do that through consensus if there is that consensus. I'm seeing everybody nod. Supervisor Reynolds and Chair Gibbs, does that make sense?
Seems reasonable to me.
I'm good with that.
All right, let's go with that. Maybe what we'll do is we'll put together that in you can update the proposal, just bring it in at one of our upcoming meetings and for your review, and then we'll try to finalize it for administration. All right, thank you. Next, we will go on to review the county administrator's work plan impacting the committee. And I sent that out, and I apologize, but Lance, could you share that while I give the overview? Sure. What Administrator, there's 2 pages. Administrator Leonard is sharing with you is what was sent to the executive committee, and I apologize, Supervisor Reynolds and Chair Gibbs, you have this because you sent the email out. But what we're looking at is the administrator is presented to the executive committee, and there were a few amendments to it that are reflected in these documents. But what I'd like is just your thoughts on what should be from the Human Resources Finance Property Committee, what you would view as the top priorities in the administrator's work plan, because I think Chair Gibbs said it well. If we don't have priorities, everything's a priority and nothing's a priority. So what you received was the preliminary work plan. Are there certain things that, and when you look at the list, most of those items reflect upon the items that are before this committee in one form or another. But are there certain things that you would like me to convey to the executive committee for the purposes of developing the work plan that will be submitted to the county board that you think are the highest priority? Supervisor Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know that I've said this once before, but outside of salaries, the biggest expense that the county has outside of salary and construction is health insurance. And therefore, I think item 3F is imperative that we dial in on the opportunity that it is to go to self-insurance. But I would also like to add that in addition to what is there, that we need to provide innovation in plan design to incentivize healthy behaviors and wise choice of services with the goal of lowering our 2026 health insurance budget. That's really the opportunity that lies before us if we do that right. And there's many examples of businesses and other government entities who have embraced this and have been able to significantly lower. I believe our family health care costs in total is over $20,000 per family. So there's examples of companies getting that down to $14,000, $15,000. And I would see that as a significant priority.
Are there other items within this list? You know, we have unlimited needs and that, but the executive committee will be meeting in early February to try to develop the plan to submit to the board, and I'm just looking for input. I think it's important that as many members as possible have as many opportunities as possible for input into that process, so it really reflects the wishes and desires of the board. I know you're kind of getting caught off guard because we haven't historically done this way, but I just wanted and welcome your input into this, and I'm sure Chair Gibbs would share that thought. So I don't need to know today, but I would like to know, by the end of the week, if you have, we need to know, well, by the early part of next week, if you have some other thoughts. And I don't know if you're looking for any clarification in here, but I'm hearing health insurance and that movement toward, and health insurance is a priority. Are there other priorities in here that you would like to make sure that the administrator has the appropriate time to work on. Well, again, please let me know. We've never done this again before at the committee level, and I should have written a memo on it, but this came out last week, the one that the form in front of you after we had prepared the agenda. But please let me know if you have any other thoughts. Anything you'd like to add?
If you're looking for it electronically, it is in the packet. It just looks a little bit different than what Chair Robinson handed out. There were a couple items that were added at the executive committee discussion back in earlier this month. I did flag those in the document. I can send that out. I'll send out an email with that updated language from the executive discussion.
Right. Anything else? If not, we'll move on, but please let me know, and we'll provide that feedback to the executive committee. All right, committee relationship with constitutional officers and departments with the reporting relationship to the committee, including but not limited to discussion of form and frequency of reporting and creation of an annual work plan for tracking of progress. This is a continuation from our discussion at our last meeting, and we talked about a number of items for instance, in the Register of Deeds compliance with, I believe it's Act 235, relative to the removal of the information relative to the judges from the tax rules and the compliance with that. We've talked about tax deeds. We've talked about, from the finance department, the audit and the fund balance policies, and from HR, we've talked about, we've referenced benefit design and dashboards. We don't have anything for the Corp Council specifically, but one of the things that was added to the administrator, we know you do just such an outstanding job that you're beyond peer or comparison, right?
I sense some sarcasm.
But any thoughts on, as we move into this dashboard? I know the administrator is working on key indicators for all of the department heads, but we again have a reporting relationship with the clerk, the treasurer, the Register of Deeds, the finance department, human resources department, and corporation counsel. So within that sort of the scope of our committee, are there things that you would like to see us have them report on? And again, Wood County has a formal process on a periodic basis to get information in relative to those dashboards. Vice Chair Marshall.
As you had said, that Wood County has a process. Perhaps every quarter we could have them all appear, but one per month or two per month, whatever it turns out to be, but that we spread it out and we get a report like, this is what is happening, this is the initiatives my office has. Just a verbal and written report would be great.
It would be an elected in a department. And again, we don't want to get into the operational issues within the departments, but we do want to get into those that drive policy relative to us. Supervisor Lemmer.
So I did a Google search because, quite frankly, the treasurer's office and even the Register of Deeds, they're not as transparent as, say, the clerk and the Corp Council, because the clerk, I mean, you see the minutes all the time. She's running elections, so we see that. I had to look up what does the Register of Deeds do, and I had to look up, really what the Treasurer's Office does, and there are things the Treasurer's Office has written down in your budget, the things that were filled out, the mission, and some of the things. I had no idea that they receive all the monies from all sources to the county, and other monies, which state statute and county ordinance, sorry, I'm reading and I don't really have my glasses calibrated, but the statutory duties include collection of property taxes and settling with other jurisdictions. These are things that really aren't happening in our eyesights. So I think we do need KPIs of all of these, but as I was looking more at the Treasurer's Office specifically, there's so much collaboration with finance and with the Register of Deeds and with the clerk and with Corp Council and other municipalities, and I guess I'd like to know where are the bottlenecks, because I would hate to have, say, the clerk have a work plan that hinges on something that somebody else is responsible for. So I think it would make sense if we could have some sort of a, I don't know, logistical flow chart, and then identify if there are bottlenecks, what resources then are needed, because it seems like it's taking a long time to get our tax deeds. At this rate, it's going to take decades before we are whole on those. So how can we make that, how can we streamline that procedure? And I would assume that there are so many different chess pieces being played. Maybe there's one piece that needs to be optimized if that's possible. So to me, those KPIs are really important. And I would like quarterly reports to see so that it is more transparent, and we can figure out what is really being done in our government.
Well, and you're right. When you look at the issue of tax deeds to sale, taking and sale, you've got the Treasurer's Office, you've got the Corp Council involved, you've got the clerk involved, and you're sort of looking at a Lean Six Sigma type approach where you do a root cause. You look at everybody's role in the process, where the processes are there hang-ups, and then where do we go? And some of those hang-ups are statutory, but based upon the new legislation, there are now mandatory dates that need to be met in that process, and I'm not sure that we've really built that into our system. So perhaps that is one of the things that we would ask all of the entities involved in the system work on collectively. So that would be one, that whole tax foreclosure to sale of property. And I think that's fair for us to do that within a multi-department basis. That's what you're looking for on that issue. And if we have others, we could then ask for, identify what those roles would be. So, other thoughts? So I will work with the administrator. We'll try to capture what we've talked about. We'll have a discussion with the department heads, and we'll bring in at one of our next two meetings sort of an outline of what we'd like that to look like in terms of the dashboards for your review and consideration. And we'll build in that whole tax deed area. We'll build in, I think Supervisor Marshall, we've heard that employee benefits and how we would build that in there. We'll bring that in for your review and consideration. Supervisor Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When we're building this dashboard, could we also include KPIs that include, I don't know exactly what it would be, but something with customer service? Because I know that has been an issue, particularly with the Treasurer's Office. I have a constituent who has been, it's been about a year and a half now, and she's just trying to get an answer on a home next door that's falling apart that she'd like to buy so she can not have to look at it. And I believe that, I mean, she had a struggle with getting a hold of the Treasurer's Office. She ended up reaching out to me. I sent an email. I ended up getting information from someone at the city, one of my now former coworkers, knew someone in the office and was able to get information. So I think when we're looking at that dashboard, that's one of the things I'd like to consider as well, because this is one of the few times a constituent has reached out, and I'm trying to help that constituent out, and I'm finding difficulties in that because of the customer service aspects of that office. So I'd like that included in there. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? So we can look at the kinds, I know the DNR had the state of Wisconsin had an expectation that your voicemail is up to date, your emails are up to date. If you're out of the office, you have an out of office account, and you respond within 24 hours. Those were sort of the framework, but that's, I think we would look to the administrator to develop that, but we could build those metrics in somehow to look at that.
Yeah, I think, well, off the top of my head, I can bring to you, and I offered this last time, we do have from the staff perspective across all the departments. I've worked with our data officer, and I want to be very clear. We have a data officer, single, not a data department with numerous people, but we, I think, are really making good progress in terms of identifying what those KPIs are for. We're going to have to eat this elephant one bite at a time. And I will bring a memo I report to executive in terms of my oversight, but I will bring a memo to executive, and I certainly can share it with all the committees, that outlines what our plan of attack is with regard to getting those KPIs in place to say, hey, where is the data? Does this data exist? What is the measure? And then we're going to start with the justice system. Quite honestly, from my judgment, that's the lowest hanging fruit. You spend a lot of money in the justice system. And to the point before about multiple entities or multiple departments having a hand in shared success, no system is a better indicator of that than the justice system. Whether it's the courts with the elected judges, law enforcement, whether that's our sheriff's office or our other 13 law enforcement agencies, the district attorney's office, state public defender's office, all these things, there's a lot of variables. So we're starting there, then moving to public works, because I think as Vice Chair Marshall referenced, you spend a lot of money on construction, not only new construction, but your current businesses are huge assets. Not only the buildings, but all of your roadways. I mean, when you think about it, it's $250,000 to pave a mile of road. Well, you got well over 600 miles. You have a lot of money tied up in those physical public works assets. So I'll bring back a memo that'll show you kind of, this is the plan. We're going to start here and move through. But I do want to say very clearly, my goal has been, the vision I want us to get to is that every system and every department within every system has some key performance indicators for our programs that resonate first and foremost with the public and with the board. To Supervisor Lemmer's point, there's a lot of stuff we do that people have no idea. And then even when we do say, hey, this is what we do, without context, there's no idea of whether it's good or not. Like if I were to tell you, hey, we maintain a PACER rating of over 7. In fact, it's about 7.1. Okay, what does that mean? So we're trying to get those indicators of how much of certain things do we do, how well do we do those things, and then the last indicator is one of impact. Is anyone better off? Again, so how do you try to convey to the public, but also then to the board, because my hope is that these things then guide you in some of our difficult resource allocation decisions we need to make, or I should say that you need to make. Where do you want to put those resources? Because as the chair referenced with the work plan, you only have so much time in a day. We have a lot of really good ideas and a lot of worthwhile projects, but we need to take them one at a time. The same is true with this effort. I'll bring back that memo and the 236 key performance indicators that I have identified that I'm going to work have our data officer work with all of the departments in kind of not chronological, but in priority order. Where do we want to go? Because if everything's a priority, we're not going to get any of them done. And the previous direction from the board was, hey, the justice system is where we need to start with data, but I'll happily bring that back. And there's no reason I can't have that done in a month. In terms of not the data project, just the memo and the outline of the KPIs. And a lot of the KPIs you've already seen, they're in the budget. You go back and look at the budget from 2020, before I was appointed, that there's no data in there. Like, we really have tried to get, hey, here's some important information for you to make budget decisions. A lot of the KPIs are in there, but certainly there's a lot more. And you don't have 236 in the budget right now.
Supervisor Marshall.
I know that your goal is to automate this, all the KPIs, and I'm just wondering if we can get some manual KPIs written, because I feel like if we wait till automation, it's going to be past our term. You know, we've kind of talked about KPIs and dashboards for 2 years now, and I would like to see something preliminary within the next month.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no way we're going to have automation, quite honestly, probably for the full battery of these, for years. I mean, Montgomery County has a data team of 42 people, and it took them 15 years. And they're still changing. We have a data team of 1. So absolutely. I'll work on that memo. We actually just met about it earlier this week. And the list of the 236 KPIs, I'll present it to exec and bring it back to this committee. Happy to get your input. Again, I would just caution that if we try to measure everything, we're not going to get anything done. And that's the thing with data, right? You're going to have everything about it is interesting. And when I show you 5 data measures, you're going to say, oh, that's interesting, but what about 6, 7, 8? And my only caution is, let's be very, very intentional with that decision making. But yeah, happy to bring that back.
Supervisor Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I will agree with Supervisor Marshall as well that I think we need to have a priority on getting some initial KPIs, especially in terms of, we just talked about the budget. And for me, I view this as a lot of these positions are elected. So, those elected officials, they're accountable to the voters of how they run their departments. But we're the ones that decide how those budgets get allocated. And if there's a lack of resources somewhere, we need to see that so we can help those officials meet those needs for the residents. So I would also like to see something sooner rather than later.
All right, we'll have that presentation on the KPIs and look at what we can do manually. And I think that's the intent of trying to establish those dashboards for the committee is, we can go above and beyond or in harmony with those KPIs in terms of what the committee is looking at. Anything else on that? We will, again, bring that back. I'll work with the administrator, and we'll bring that back soon. Update efforts to address tax delinquent properties, including but not limited to new batch of in-rem filings and handling of tax bills that have been historically undeliverable, and possible action by the committee relative to next steps. The treasurer, Beiersdorf, had a family emergency and can't participate today. Is there anything else?
I can give an update on the action that, based on your previous discussion, staff and Mike's office is kind of taking the lead on this, working with IT. We are going to have the letters sent out yet this week for, if you recall, the 131 properties that were pulled from the mass mailing, I'll call it, of delinquency notices. We're going to send all of those properties within that list of 131 that are still delinquent, we're going to send them the same delinquency notice that went out previously. And that should happen by the end of this week. The other update is, and I know Treasurer Beiersdorf is working on this, but there was a request to have a calendar of communications when we would send out kind of these mass delinquency notifications, and how does that interplay with the already existing communications that the treasurer's office sends out. And I believe Treasurer Beiersdorf it's one of the things she's working on. But my plan, based on the guidance from this committee, is once we know what already existing communications go out from the treasurer's office relative to outstanding tax balances and the tax collection during any given tax year, that we'd aim for 2 other communications that would go out to those individuals that are delinquent a year, at least 2. And I'm committed to doing that. We had a lot of success, like I referenced at the last meeting, with those mass mailings. We'll continue doing that.
Supervisor Limmer.
Last meeting, I wasn't at, but I watched the tape, and you had talked about prioritizing. And I just wanted to chime in and say, in my opinion, I would like to prioritize some of the parcels that are owned by the same person, essentially. And especially if they are businesses. So for instance, I have just the October one. Maybe this is moot because it's old data now, but Wassa Papers had, 13 parcels and upwards of $80,000, and they're all mostly in the village of Maine, which was Brokaw at the time, or maybe it's still Brokaw, I'm not sure. But I wonder, and I emailed the the treasurer about this and haven't heard back from her yet, but I'm just wondering, do we work with those other municipalities if they are all in one area? Do they even know? Because we're kind of making them whole anyway. Maybe there's just not the incentive for them to go after. But I'm not even sure whose responsibility. Is that our responsibility or the Village of Maine's responsibility for that one case?
Sure.
But there are lots of cases like that I think we could go for that are high dollar.
Yeah, good question. And the law relative to tax collection, particularly delinquent tax collection, is that the municipalities are only able to collect the currently owed in that tax year tax bill. So my tax bill, if I live in the Village of Maine or a town, they are able to collect what is owed in any given current year. They are not able to collect past due taxes. Those payments have to come in to the county treasurer's office.
But we square up
Right.
in each year, so they're made whole. So,
But then to your point, do they even know? Great question, which is why we sent out earlier this year. It was either earlier this year or at the end of last year. I think it was earlier this year. To all of the municipal treasurers, got essentially the counter book list for their individual municipality. The thought process being that, and we sent a nice communication outlining why, it's not their responsibility to collect the past due, but they are probably, particularly in towns, the most well-suited to engage in a conversation with that individual when they show up to pay, if they do show up to pay in person, their current year tax obligation. To try to get at those individuals that, hey, maybe I don't know. I don't think that addresses the Wassa Papers situation you referenced. That said, I do know that as a result of that mass delinquency mailing we sent out, we had a number of kind of those parcels where there were large dollar amounts or multiple parcels actually come in and pay. But so we're trying to accomplish it a number of ways. Also went out to the Towns Association meeting a couple of weeks ago, the Eastern Towns meeting, and I gave an update. Hey, you all got this email. Let me again tell you why. The counter book is, again, a way to see that individuals are delinquent on their taxes. The reason we're sending it to you, is because you're probably best suited to have. You probably know the 6 people that are listed in your town. I plan on doing the same general presentation at the Western Towns meeting this week. Again, that counterbook report was sent out to every town and village treasurer, I believe. The treasurer's office sent it out, but I did get confirmation that it went out.
Anything else? If not, we will keep the committee informed going forward, and we will look for streamlining that process going forward. Thank you. ARPA tracking, I added that to the agenda just to make sure my hope, now that we've encumbered the ARPA dollars, we had to do that by December 31st of last year. We now continue to have that December 31st of 2026 deadline for the actual expenditure of those funds, or we lose them. I would like to set up a quarterly detailed reporting system so we know where we are relative to that. I think we have some ability to move dollars on projects within for instance, the capital improvement plan, but I just think that it is in our interest to stay on top of that to make sure that we are expending dollars prudently and completely, so that we're not doing it. So I put it on with the thought that we would, if you're okay getting that quarterly report and discussion relative to where we are with those expenditures and working with Sam and others to get that in. But I think it would show, the administrator can say, we've got a lot of people looking at this, please move those projects along. There's times where projects can get lost in the context of your day-to-day activities, and this is one where that money has to be spent, or else we're going to replace, there aren't carryover funds beyond that December 31st deadline. Is that an acceptable approach? Supervisor Lemmer?
Are those funds secure based on the?
We have those funds. Those funds are in.
So those aren't considered federal grants that are right now on hold or being paused? I just wonder, are they ever going to get clawed back, or are they secure?
Correct. They are not currently part of the communication that many have seen this morning. We have encumbered them in accordance to the guidance. So we're still in the process of using them, but we physically have the funds. They gave them in two tranche payments, I think in 2021. So we physically have those dollars in our bank.
I think Supervisor Lemmer raises a good point, and I think once we get farther into understanding the nuances of some of the executive orders and directives from OMB and others, if there are impacts to county operations from some of that reallocation or retrieving some of those grant dollars that would impact the county's budget, we'll try to bring that information and keep the committee informed. Good luck. But I think you saw, if you read your email today, that both the Wisconsin Counties Association and the National Association of Counties is trying to track this information as well as how it would impact various programs. But we've got a number of community organizations too that are dependent upon federal dollars. And I think of my daughter working at the neighbor's place, and others, what ramifications might that have relative to some of those. And some of them are state dollars, some of them are passed through the states, but I think we have to keep our eyes wide open and have an understanding of what the budgetary implications might be should cuts be made. So is that acceptable, quarterly reporting? Looking for consensus. And so when you see it, it's there for that reason, and I would, we'll be relying on Chris, particularly on the capital side, and on CM and the administrator to give us that information. All right. Approval of the budget amendment, Youth Justice Innovation Grant. Who wants to cue?
I'll kick it off and Krista will take it away. Excuse me. You should have in your email, and I apologize, it wasn't in the packet. It is in the packet for the Health and Human Services Committee, but I will hand out for those in person hard copies of just a summary memo, kind of going back to an earlier point that Supervisor Lemmer referenced. You have a budget amendment form that we have, but it's light on kind of the why. It talks through the things we need to from a financial standpoint. But Krista, I asked her to put together a memo, and she did that. It just didn't get in the packet. But it is sent to you in email, and I'll hand it out. But essentially, there are two budget amendments. Again, pursuant to your rules, doesn't need to go to the full board based on the size. These are relatively small amendments, but Krista can talk through kind of the why behind each of the amendments, and then answer any questions you might have. But I'll hand these memos out right now.
Are those ones you sent?
Yeah.
I got that. I think one of them is wrong. Lance,
Yeah.
is the ISS program, that's not one of them today, so you've
That is
got,
not. Today, you should have two budget amendments in front of you. One is for child care certification services, and the other is the Youth Justice Innovation Grant. So both of those are increases to the budget for this year. I can start with the child care certification one. We did provide a presentation to the Health and Human Services Committee regarding that just last week, maybe the week before. And what we are doing is amending the budget to increase it really by $58,674 because we are moving that service over to subcontract with Child Care Incorporated. And so in the 25 budget before we had planned to do that, we had really only put in the cost for our staff to run that service, and it's much lower because we don't dedicate very many hours to that, 5 to 10 hours a month maybe. And we don't have any staff who are specialized in certification, and so we made the decision along with our boards to move that over under a subcontract. So we have to show an increase to the revenue and expenditures in the budget to balance it out. There is no taxpayer, local taxpayer dollars that are going into that. It's not levy. That is a completely funded program from the state in order to provide those certification services. The other reason we decided to subcontract that is, as you know, we are seeing a rapid decline in our certification services, and we've seen a 90% decrease in those services since 2011. And so we're hoping that childcare, being the experts, having all of the resources and the training and doing all the licensing, are able to increase those numbers of either our certified providers or our licensed providers. So that's the reason for the budget amendment on the childcare certification. Any questions on that one?
why don't we deal with them one at a time? And they're out of order, and then we can, are there any questions relative to this budget transfer? It's actually the second one on the agenda, so. Any questions, discussion, or motions? Supervisor Marshall?
I assume this is a one-year grant, is that right? It covers 1 year's of expenses, or is that contract longer than a year?
That's correct. It is a one-year contract.
So if the federal government doesn't give us money in 2026, are you ready to take it back in-house?
We would have to.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? If not, what are the wishes of the committee? Supervisor Hart.
I'll move to
Move to approve.
We have a motion by Chair Gibbs. Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Hart. Any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor of adoption of the, or approval of the transfer will signify by, or the budget amendment will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Now we'll go to the Youth Justice Innovation Grant.
Fantastic. Okay, so the other one is the Youth Justice Innovation Grant. This is a small increase of $6,000 for 2025. The state gave us more money than we anticipated. And so that was a great thing. Particularly, this money is supposed to be used for the Youth Opportunity Center. You'll recall that's our alternative to our shelter care program that we implemented in June, and specifically towards a youth leadership opportunities. And so the state is holding meetings for youth to participate, to talk about their experience throughout the program, and to really help drive what that looks like going forward. And so that is what that funds is utilized for, is to incentivize those youth to attend those sessions.
Are there any questions relative to the budget amendment? Transfer of funds. If not, what are your wishes? Moved by Supervisor Hart to approve, seconded by Supervisor Lemmer. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to amending the Code of Ordinances to require PIN numbers for property identification numbers for Register of Deed filings. Who wants to take the lead on this? Jenny, I think it came from you.
You want to? So I'll start. There's a state statute that lets you do this, provided there's an ordinance that the county board adopts that says you are requiring this. So
That's correct.
you want to talk through why you think it's, excuse me, why you think it's a good idea and why the board should adopt an ordinance.
I think it's a good idea to have the PIN numbers on the documents. It just makes reporting a lot easier and more clean. A lot of people like to search by PIN numbers. However, you can only search by PIN numbers from like 92 to the present, and I think it puts it back on the person submitting the document to make sure they have the accurate number on there.
And Jenny, correct me if I'm wrong, in our conversation, you said a lot of other counties that you're aware already have this.
Some of the counties do, not all of them.
Right. But it's fairly common.
Right. And they usually do have it on. And even like with deeds, when you do the electronic transfer return, you have to have the PIN number on there. So it really makes sense to have it on.
Mike, anything you'd like to add as a drafter?
Well, I am not much of the drafter because Jenny gave it to me pretty much fully done. But I'll take credit where credit is due, and it is not due in this case. No, I think just from a legal perspective, state law says if you pass an ordinance, then you can require this on the county level. Just looking at the normal filing process, if a PIN number isn't present, we still usually need it to record something. So it's shifting the burden from Jenny's staff to the filer, which I think is a good idea. And it's consistent with the transfer return requirements already. So it really is kind of codifying how the practice already is, but making sure that the Register of Deeds office has something to point to enforce that requirement.
Any questions? If not, what are your wishes relative to the proposed ordinance change? Moved by Supervisor Lemmer to approve. Is there a second? Seconded by Vice Chair Marshall. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Thank you. All right, amending Chapter 1.51 of the Marathon County Code for conduit bonding. I know this was not high on our work plan, but the administrator asked me what we were going to do with it, so I put it on the agenda, and it's before us. And we had talked about that a while ago, and I'll turn it over to the administrator.
Sure. Excuse me. Also in your email, you should see a draft. The most recent consideration you had was an amendment to 1.51 sub 7. And I sent that via email. It shouldn't be overly surprising to you. You talked about it a while ago, but as the chair said, we never really got any resolution. What is in your packet is your current, the current provision. So happy to answer any questions. I don't know if I want to take credit for drafting it, as was alluded to before. You've kind of gone round and round on terms of what you want in terms of a conduit bonding process. This was something that we hadn't heard for, we hadn't had any requests for, I believe, probably well over a decade. And then we got a whole slew of them right in a row from interested entities, whether they were interested in direct conduit financing or conduit financing through the Public Finance Authority. So my sense is that is what spurred the discussion at this committee relative to, hey, maybe we should update the existing 1.51 sub 7. And you initially had it drafted where a task force would be created to evaluate those, each of those requests, but I kind of think you kind of circle back to that being something that is more within the wheelhouse of this committee. So that is the most recent draft, is that HR Finance would be kind of that reviewing and recommending body, but ultimately a lot of the information again has to go back to the county board. And certainly any conduit financing approval needs to go back to the county board.
You know, Supervisor Lemmer, this was an important issue for you in light of the fact we didn't put it in the packet, we put the current in there. Are we prepared to deal with it today?
Well, I just want to make sure that whatever we have written down, it protects us from bearing any costs environmentally. And I don't know how to do that. You know, when we were talking about digesters, there's possible leakage issues, and I don't want us to have to bear that, and I don't know how to do that in this. Do we seek indemnification from the corporate parent in the event that somebody were to go belly up to protect us? I guess that's my concern. Some of the things that we were dealing with are very environmental, and it seemed like they skirted the town or village. I would like to know that the town and village are endorsing it, because quite frankly, I don't really know why we would be involved in this. I'm not really up on conduit financing, but it just feels like, why do we need to be involved in this at all? And then, you know, just how can we make sure that this is giving jobs, and jobs that pay a living wage and that really do propel our plans forward, whether it's our comprehensive plan, our land use plan, or you know, any of our plans that we have. Does this? I just wanted to make sure that fits and that discussion was had.
If I may, Mr. Chair, just
Go
to, so the way that the provision is drafted, again, it goes back to this committee and ultimately to the full board for consideration of any, what I would term your most recent comments, any financial or non-financial conditions upon which the conduit bond would be conditioned. So you have the ability to do that. I don't know if it would be helpful. This is my characterization of where conduit bonding lives in the statutes. My best characterization is it's an economic development tool. To your point of whether or not you need to be involved, the short answer is absolutely not. In fact, you will recall we had at least one of the entities that was initially interested in conduit financing. Ultimately, they had all the financing they needed already. It was essentially 3/4 done. And they came to the county board to essentially refinance through conduit financing through PFA. And the board approved that. They can get independent financing. That's always available to them, and then they just need to comply. Any entity just needs to comply with existing zoning and other regulatory provisions that might otherwise exist. Again, what conduit financing allows for under current law, and Mike, please, you know, add your perspective here, but I really do view it as an economic development tool. It's something that is in the county's toolbox when a entity that meets the requirements under 661103? Yeah, 661103, that it satisfies the public purpose or public purposes laid out in that statute that the legislature has identified for when they would authorize conduit bonding. If it's one of those and the county board or the municipality wants to support moving forward, they can do that. It's relatively light on detail as to what financial and non-financial conditions you can put on. My simple characterization of what you can put on is whatever they'd agree to. At some point, everything comes down to money. If you think about it like a private business, right? They're wanting conduit financing because the financing you're able to provide is less costly than the financing they're able to get on the private market. If you put either financial, that is conditions that say you need to pay us, you need to pay the county, the entity needs to pay the county a certain fee as a percentage of the loan or a percentage of the financing. That's just a cost they add on, and at some point it becomes more problematic to go the conduit financing route than trying to procure private financing. Similarly, the same is true with non-financial. To the point about the digesters, there was a lot of conversation about, hey, what do we want to require in terms of monitoring, well monitoring, and well replacement reserve fund. Those things all can be correlated to dollar amounts. And at the end of the day, it's a business decision for the business. Do I get private financing or do I continue to go through the conduit financing route, whether that's directly through the county or municipality or that's through the public finance authority. But that's my characterization. Again, it's probably an oversimplification, but you can essentially require what you want, whatever they'll agree to. You have the thing they want, which is the lower cost financing. Again, how does that relate to your ability to enforce it, though, is the real...
The question that I would have for perhaps Michael and Administrator Leonard would be, again, there are two forms of conduit bonding as they present, or two types. The conduit bonding where we are somehow pledging our faith and credit if there's a failure, and the other one is where if we're part of the conduit bonding approval process relative to accessing funds outside of the county. And do we want to have different processes and protocols for those? I think many of the agricultural were in the category where they were seeking our approval to go to a different funding source, but then we had the situation relative to bug tussle where we basically joined in other counties and it. Is there a desire or should we be looking at the type of conduit bonding or our role in that bonding differently and have different criteria for them, or should we apply the same criteria to all?
I'll tell you, you can do what you wish. Excuse me. The draft that I sent very clearly says, unless a compelling public policy rationale exists, the county will not support financing for a project that would in any way constitute indebtedness of the county or constitute a charge against the county's general credit or taxing powers or a pecuniary liability of the county. So in the current draft, well, actually in the one that exists today, you have very similar language to what I just read. And that same cautionary language is included in the proposal. So, short answer, should you, it's drafted that you want to. If you don't want to, we need to make some changes.
Supervisor Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As a economic development tool, it really should be used for those cases that are only going to happen but for the funding. So I'd like to see something in regard to that, as well as a condition that the ownership is of the company or the parent company is U.S. owned. And I believe that, having received the file at 2:00, that I would like more time to digest what's before us and take it up at another meeting. Thank you.
Michael, you have the contemplative look upon you.
Oh, only because I don't know initially if the county could require U.S. ownership, but I would want to look into that too.
So Vice Chair Marshall has requested that we delay this to a future meeting and then provided some opportunities for additional research for the Corporation Council. Is there an objection to delaying it? I think, can we do that by unanimous consent?
You could do that without any consent.
We'll do it as the chair would ask that we delay this to a future meeting to give committee members additional time to review. I would suggest that if you have some concerns, that you communicate those concerns to Administrator Leonard or Michael, and then we can move forward with our discussion. We'll let them look at those issues and come forward. Anything else on this issue? We didn't want to lose it. All right, thank you. Review the committee work plan. I think it's important for everyone to look at what they do. We do that with the administrator. And this committee adopted a work plan last year, and we really didn't capture it in a final form, but we did in our prioritization. I think we've made some progress, but I just wanted to put it out there so that we all keep in mind that we are trying to work toward accomplishing things. So we had identified a number of items, and we talked about the ARPA program, establishing criteria for the review and ranking for the ARPA projects by the end of 2024. We did that. It was included in the 2025 budget. We talked about trying to establish goals for the long-term facilities and property management within the adoption of a long-term facility plan. I think that's still a work in progress with not perhaps as much work done as we'd like, but I think we will have ample opportunities to do that with the social services building on Thomas Street, the River Drive Center, potentially, depending upon what the outcome is relative to the highway facility with those, but we'll continue to do that. Audit compliance was a high one. We thank you to Samantha Finsky for developing a plan relative to follow-up on the audit. I think we've got that underway, and we'll be tracking that throughout the year in terms of audit compliance. The tax delinquent property process policy setting. I think, again, we need to perhaps revisit some of those recent, the Hennepin case and some of the recent changes to the statutes relative to the timing and the process, and I think we can deal with that through the work plan that we're giving to the various departments this year. But I think Supervisor Lemmer and Supervisor Marshall have concerns about how long this is taking, and we can work on that. But that will be one of the top priorities for this year. Going forward, tax increment financing, pursue legislative recommendations and criteria for guiding representation on local committee. The TIF task force has presented to us. There have been discussions at the EEEDC committee relative to it, and at the executive committee. And each of those is looking at it from the perspective of this committee I think we were the ones that initiated the discussion on trying to get the task force set up. I think other committees are dealing with some of those changes, and there was a healthy discussion at the last executive committee relative to it, but I think there's a little bit of a need to close the loop on those recommendations and where we're going forward. Benefit design and delivery. I think that we articulated that need going forward, and we'll work with the administrator and administration to work on a schedule. I think there's an expectation we have a sort of a schedule going forward and an understanding of what that process will involve, so we'll keep that on there. And then sale of and disposition of excess county property, tied into the long-term facilities plan, as well as other efforts we've begun to use with the clerk, through the clerk, the surplus property for those properties that we've deemed surplus, and that's worked well for us. But I think that there still is that, what do we do with those parcels that are owned by the county that weren't taken through tax delinquency, that are surplus, and how do we move forward? So I think, again, that's tied into the long-term facilities plan, but I think we need to spend some time into, this is a property that is excess. This is a property that we hold for a time certain because of potential use by the county. And these are properties that we need for the county, and move forward, if that makes sense. And that's something we can spend some time on this year. And then the cultural competence, promote cultural competence and employment policies in the design. That was a carryover from the work that was done through the, the Diversity Affairs Task Force that we assumed. In each of the standing committees looked at areas. I think it's something that Molly has been working on, and we would continue to monitor. Program efficiency, monitor and evaluate policies relating to the delivery of services that are delivered and effectively as possible. I think we try to do that. I think that the key performance indicators will help in that regard going forward, but that ties into the dashboards. But included in that program efficiency is evaluation of how we provide services and other opportunities for us to deliver it more effectively. Dashboards we talked about earlier, 151 of the county ordinance relative to the conduit borrowing we talked about, but the use of the fund balances, I think we've begun that process again through the finance director and the administration working on identifying those fact sheets and providing an annual report on what's in the fund balance, what's obligated, what's what's the growth been, how have we spent those going forward. And these were all of the items, several of them were not very high. Procurement policies, evaluate the county procurement process, including whether certain activities should be centralized or remain within departments. Evaluate the benefits and costs associated with the hiring of a procurement officer. We didn't do that. Also, if you look at the administrator's work plan and comments on there, the administrator had identified the issue of making sure we've got the proper review of the procurement documents going through, and there may be some changes to that will result in that, but that's something we will need to keep our eye on. Conduit bonds, again, we talked about under 151.7. Monitor energy efficiency. I think we asked administration as part of the last budget to come in with a lower than projected, estimated energy cost, but I think there's more that could be done in that area. And then compliance with the strategic plan that received no votes on the county, but the committee, but I think we'll continue to look at that. More importantly, the comprehensive plan is in the process of being updated. It was not factored into when we identified the 2-year work plan. There will be a role for this committee to review segments of the comprehensive plan as we move forward and provide input into the development of the next comprehensive plan. So that is those were the identified issues or work items that this committee had come up with. Again, I went through them in sort of ranking order. And it's more for education, but does anybody have any questions or thoughts on other things or changes in priorities that we should be doing? I think, again, it's important that we go back and reflect on what we've done or haven't done, which is why it's here. Supervisor Limmer.
I know you don't have a crystal ball, nobody in this room does, but what about if something happens with the federal funding and grants get taken away? Are we looking at furloughs? Are we looking at cuts? Do we need to just put that on the work plan as if there's anything we need to respond to, or is that an operational thing that is just something that you guys handle behind the scenes?
Short answer to your first question, do you need to put it on your work plan? I would say no at this point. My general sentiment is always like, let's take a breath and see what comes down before we spend countless hours trying to come up with a plan that in all likelihood isn't going to be very valuable, because whatever comes out is going to be different than what we think. That said, should there be significant impacts, I would bring a plan to you, similar to what I did for those of you that were on the board when it was early 2020, when I was appointed, and then the pandemic happened, and everyone's like, hey, what are we going to do? We expected significant revenue reductions, and we put together a budget repair plan. I put together a budget repair plan and offered it to the board. Hey, these are the things we're going to do. And we did some blunt instrument things, like kind of like what you alluded to, hiring freezes. We held off, like, let's see what comes in terms of revenues. And there are some short-term things we can do, but I'm a big fan of, hey, let's exercise some caution here and not make significant changes on what might occur. A lot of the funding that we rely upon is funding that comes through both the state and federal budgets. And the action that is required to make changes to those sort of things is very similar to what you have to do for your county budget. Just even today, right? There's certain small things can happen at this committee level, but if there's a fundamental change that's requested to your budget, it has to go through that process, and there's a supermajority vote that's needed. So again, short term, and we put out a communication to our department heads today saying the same thing. We're watching. We're going to stay informed as to, just like every other governmental entity across the country right now, right? We're going to see what this means, and we'll evaluate that when we have some better understanding, and we'll plan accordingly. So I don't know that that's something we need to spend considerable time at this committee. You as policymakers need to spend time doing right now. I will certainly, if there is a need to make operational changes to be within budget, I'm going to be in front of you telling you, hey, this is the situation. These are the potential courses of action that we could take to live within that budget. Because again, our budget, if we need to modify it, if we don't have the revenues coming in, you're going to know about that if we need to make changes. We're not going to spend down reserves without you knowing about it and approving that course of action.
Other thoughts, comments? If not, we're making progress because of your efforts and in your engagement in these meetings. So I thank you for that interest and your perspective. So but we'll continue to move ahead. I think we started the committee work plan concept, and other committees have adopted it. So I think it's a good thing. Anything else? If not, our next meeting is on February 12th. Just as a note, our second meeting in February is on the 18th. The county board dates have changed, right? That's correct. You want to verify?
Board meetings have changed, yes.
Right.
Board meetings are the 13th and the 20th.
20th, I'm sorry, we're on the 20th for the second finance, the same day as the board. So because the 18th is election day. So please note that in your calendars. So anything else you'd like to have us talk about? I think we identified what those topics will be. If not, what are your wishes relative to the last item on the agenda? Moved by Vice Chair Marshall, seconded by Supervisor Lemmer to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. That motion carries. Thank you. We should sit down. Your schedule.
I'm good.
You want to do it tomorrow? Give me a chance to think.
Sure.